Okay, joining us now, we have jury consultant and human behavior expert Susan Constantine joining us, and we still have with us Jamie White, trial attorney in Michigan. So Susan, I'm so fascinated to get your insight and analysis into kind of the way that Johnny Depp has sort of been presenting himself, because the first week we saw his hair down a little bit, maybe disheveled, and then the second week we saw his hair slicked back, and then during cross-examination he added the shades. How does that come across to you?
Well, you know, he's got many looks, so I'm not going to play too much into the fact that he changes his appearance. That's part of his persona. But of course, at the very beginning, he had his head down, he was disheveled. We don't know if he, you know, what the days before that were for him, because he looked like he was very stressed out. And then, of course, then he kind of gained his power back again, pulled his hair back to look a bit more confident. But his behavior when I'm watching this video, it really brings you into and about his past. And he keeps wanting to refer to his past. One of the things I want you to really pay attention to, he speaks about himself as a third person, looking back, like he's separating himself of the actions he's doing that he is admitting to, which is truthful, but he's also assigning that to that past trauma that keeps feeding him or moving forward, which is creating these feeder memories, and he's numbing them in order to somehow, you know, have a functional life. So I'm really getting a very strong grasp on his past traumas moving forward, and the behavior that he's acting out is directly linked to trauma. So I want to make that very clear. It's very obvious because you can see it in his facial expressions. You can see the horizontal lines of stress, that he's admitted to these horrific things. He doesn't flinch when he's asked about the things that he said. He's agreeing with it. I'm watching his head nod when he says it, but there's a small little pause. So it's like there's a form of like embarrassment and hesitation, but then he comes clean and he does shake his head and agrees with it.
Yeah, and you know, Jamie, I mean, he's addressing some really heavy, horrific topics, quite frankly. But Jamie, I mean, you know, he tried to basically express people lose their temper, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily cross the line into physical violence. Do you think that he was successful in that?
I do. And, you know, this case has been going on for a significant period of time outside of this trial. And the fact that there isn't any real documented evidence, at least that I've seen, showing that he assaulted her, you know, whether it was video or, you know, some admission at some point in time, that doesn't exist, to my understanding, does speak volumes. You know, he may be raucous on the text with his friends, getting drunk, tearing up the kitchen, again, not excusing that sort of behavior, but the fact that we have the visual proof they have does not show any sort of physical contact really supports his case to some degree. You know, and if I could just briefly comment on what Susan talked about, I think it's really fascinating what she said, and I think that jurors in this case are going to take away their each own little piece, and some of them are going to tune into what Susan talked about. You know, it's when I used to do jury trials, we would always offer dinner to any jurors that wanted to come out after the trial. And we especially like taking them out if we lost. And you know, usually 3 or 4 people would take us up on that. And it is so fascinating what jurors really base their decisions on.
That's very interesting. And you know, Susan, being a human behavior expert, do you think that, you know, jurors are going to relate their own personal behavior to what Depp is describing, you know, and kind of say to themselves, hey, I've lost my temper before, but I didn't, you know, abuse anybody?
Well, not just things that they may have done in the past that they're not happy about, that he's actually owned up to it, but also family members, people that they know, people they've worked with. You know, in this day, it's hard to meet someone that someone doesn't have someone in their family or someone close to them that has a drug or alcohol addiction. So I think that people are much more seasoned about what drug and alcohol addiction it is, and it is a disease. So if if I were working on the team for with Johnny Depp, I would be making sure that those jurors understood that alcoholism and drug addiction is a disease, and that would create a bent of empathy for, not necessarily compassion, but empathy for a person who's struggling with past trauma and how it's morphed into behaviors that have now maybe affected his personal life and possibly his career.
Jamie, strategically then, you know, if we know that as a society there is greater empathy for drug and alcohol addiction and, you know, I guess a greater appreciation for the fact that it is a disease in many cases, why then is the defense honing in on that so much? Is it something that might actually boomerang?
I think it could, depending on how Mr. Depp continues to testify. You know, we talked about this in the previous segment. You know, if Mr. Depp owns this and makes, you know, because it's, quite frankly, it's difficult to hear some of the information that defense counsel is putting in Mr. Depp's face is difficult to listen to because it's him admitting to friends that he has a problem. It's him admitting that he had a bad night. And now it's, you know, here he was in his most vulnerable moment, whether it was with Elton John or whoever it was, and now it's being used against him. I think that could backfire on them. But Mr. Depp has to quit being defensive about some of his use and or abuse of alcohol and drugs, own it, and move on from it. And if the defense continues on even after that, then I think it absolutely could blow up in their face.
Yeah, Susan, I'm wondering what your take on that is, because we've heard the defense bring up on cross-examination the fact that Johnny Depp would refer to himself as a monster at times. Just because he calls himself a monster doesn't actually make him a monster. I mean, I do something stupid, I call myself an idiot all the time, but I hope it doesn't make me an idiot. I mean, I don't know, what is it? How's it going to play with the jury?
Well, I like the fact that, you know, him being authentic, and I agree with your other guest, owning his behavior and calling it out instead of allowing the jurors to make that assumption and also as attributing a name to it, right? I would, if I were Johnny Depp, I'd say, yes, I was a monster, I was this and I was that, but that doesn't take away the fact that I've never abused my wife. So I had boundaries. So I think that part of owning it, jurors are much more apt to respond favorably when, in my personal experience in cases I've worked on, owning up to their some of the frailties or the demons in their lives, so to speak, really speaks more about their authenticity and their truthfulness. And this case is all about who are you going to believe, you know, Amber or Johnny Depp?
Yeah, and you know, certainly that credibility aspect is so crucial here. But Jamie, I mean, in terms of evidence, what else can the defense do apart from kind of trying to break apart the credibility of Johnny Depp and impeach him?
Well, I think the defense is doing an effective job based on the standard we're dealing with here. You know, it's important to remember this is not a criminal case. You know, this case involves a civil action for defamation, and the only thing that the only thing the defense has to show is, number one, that she was telling the truth, and number two, that she was not, if she was lying, it wasn't based on some malicious intent. There was a misunderstanding, or as we talked about earlier, different perspectives. And if, you know, Mr. Depp's team has to overcome those hurdles. And so the more seeds that get planted in the jury's head that, you know, maybe something happened, we don't have to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt in this case, just a maybe that he assaulted her at some point in time or was abusive to the point where her article was not defamatory. He will lose this case if they're successful in that. And I do think they're being effective at accomplishing that particular goal.
All right, thank you so much, trial attorney Jamie White and jury consultant, human behavioral expert Susan Constantine. Thank you for joining us. Ahead, we're going to take a closer look at the reactions, the body language of both Johnny Depp and Amber Heard throughout the course of this trial. So keep it right here on Court TV, your front row seat to justice. Welcome back to Court TV Live. All eyes are on the defamation case between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, but the testimony is certainly not the only thing catching the attention of court watchers. There's been a lot of discussion surrounding not only how the two former spouses are reacting to testimony and each other while in court, but also what they're wearing, even how they style their hair. What kind of guidance was possibly given to Depp and Heard before the trial regarding their behavior in court and what they should be wearing, how they should be presenting themselves. Still with us, trial attorney Jamie White and jury consultant, human behavior expert Susan Constantine joining us. So Susan, obviously this is right up your alley. We've already talked a little bit about the hairstyles, but the reaction of Amber Heard was something that Chanley Painter also touched on, her kind of demeanor changing from day to day. Was there anything that stood out to you with that?
Well, the overall impression that I get is that her affect that is so generally flat. She shows little emotion. That's showing concealment, right? Now, right there, she's showing a little bit of eye movement and so forth. But overall, her demeanor doesn't show a lot of expression. Her eyes will dart around a lot. She's looking to see who she's seeing that's out in the gallery. She's also watching to see who's looking at her and connecting, trying to connect with people out there. The other thing I want to speak about is her clothing. And I know you've got another attorney on it, but as a trial consultant, absolutely never put your client in a black suit, especially a female. That androgynous look in the black suit is one of power and control. So when you look at the emotion behind those colors, that is so powerful because you're giving them, the jurors, a visual presentation of who you are within. A black suit is power, dominance, control, and that is exactly what Johnny Depp is saying about her. So that is not what I would do. That cream suit that she wore, perfect. Because that looked like innocent, soft, approachable, likable, kindness. That dark black color, and also with the Gucci emblem and the parroting of the clothing, to me is very disturbing because that shows me that there is this power or the struggle for power and control and dominance over one another by parroting the look.
That's so interesting because that's something that we've actually, if you don't mind, JB, because I want to follow up with Susan on this. You mentioned the parroting because there's a lot of commentary out there that Amber Heard is kind of copying what Johnny Depp wears. Specifically, there's discussion about I guess it's a Gucci tie with a bumblebee pin or something like that, emblem on it. I mean, look at this. How do you explain this and what does it say?
Well, when I'm looking at that, I'm saying that this is a power struggle. It's like saying, see, you're looking at, I'm the one that wears the pants in the family, and he's just dressed like a guy, normal guy. But the fact that she's in power is the wrong image, the wrong message that she's trying to suggest. I got to tell you, I've been doing this a long time, and I've dressed a lot of defendants for trial. And this is the worst I have seen an attorney, dress their client or allow this to happen.
Wow, so interesting. And, there was a really stark difference between how Johnny Depp presented himself during the first week versus the second week. The hair kind of down and disheveled the first week, and then the second week it's tied back, and he looks, kind of clean and slick. What does that say?
Well, again, it's probably how he was feeling that moment when he woke up that morning. We've seen that with Michael Jackson, too. Remember when he was tried and his looks would change dramatically? So the first one, he's very disheveled. It looks like he's had a rough night. He looks more victim-like. He looks more disturbed. That look at disheveledness doesn't really do well for him, but I don't know if that's part of his character and his panache with his audiences. But the second look where he's dressed his hair back, he's now respecting the court more. And also, anytime a person wears their hair in front of their face, like in the first week, that is like a shield, right? Shielding. It's not what you want. You want to open it up because people that wear their hair back off their face are considered looking more truthful to a jury than a person's hair that is hanging down and covering and blocking their eyes or part of their face.
That is very interesting. Let me clear my face. Jamie, do you advise your clients on this sort of thing? I mean, I know Susan, you know, all day long that she focuses on that, but even trial attorneys just on a regular basis, I imagine you tell people, hey, don't wear that shirt.
Absolutely. You know, first of all, I'm still taking notes. I usually pay people $450 an hour for what Susan just did. But no, it's, you know, I always say that, and this is particularly true in this case, anybody that's ever done trial law, there's an element of theater to it. And there's just no getting around that. You know, legal dramas are probably the most popular cinema there is. And it's because there is a level of theater. So, you know, dressing the client, you know, how is the client going to behave, you know, at the table? Are they going to argue with you? Or how are they going to respond when somebody says something they don't like? Are they going to laugh at jokes, or are they going to sit there stoic? There's quite a bit that goes to it. Susan's a tough act to follow, but to answer your question, absolutely. You know, for a criminal case, I would tell my clients, you need to look like me from a dress point of view. You know, don't wear, you know, stuff you would wear on the streets. You know, you need to look like me. And I mean, I think every case is different, but there is definitely an element to it. And again, we interview these jurors after trials, and they tell us that, you know, these things matter.
You know, and speaking of the jurors, you know, the jury makeup is something obviously that any attorney is going to consider. In this case, you got 8 men, you got 3 women, you have 5 jurors who appear to be white, 5 Asian American, 1 appears to be black. Susan, does that kind of demographic, you know, breakdown, does it inform how a client should present themselves?
Yeah, well, that's one component of it. But I mean, as the attorney can speak more to this than I can. But when you're looking at the demographics, that gives you a nice baseline, right? We want to know what their background is, what, you know, if they've been married before, if they've had domestic violence in their background, or someone in their family member, you know, age, their ethnicity, whether it's a male or female. I mean, all this stuff does play part of it, but nothing trumps personal life, their personal experiences. So it could be anybody. And I've seen this happen. Sometimes we get into this rut where we say, okay, we're going to profile that all teachers are more authoritarian and they're going to just chop you at the block. That's just not true. But you got to really get them to open up and start to find out how they think and how they feel, how they see life and their life experiences, and how that might project onto your client.
Jamie, does it make a difference to you when you are, when you're in front of a jury? Do you change your own delivery and presentation? Do you change how your client is presenting themselves?
Yes, absolutely. You know, closing arguments, presentation to a jury, or even performing in front of the jury by way of cross-examination or direct examination, there is an art form to it. And, you know, you're always competing against the other counsel. So, and the jurors will tell you, you know, I really liked what you did as opposed to what so-and-so did, or to the contrary. You know, I really liked what Mr. John Doe did. I wish you'd have done this differently. There is a ongoing evaluation of your presentation that's happening in a jury trial. And any juror that says that they're not taking into account personality, presentation, speech, clothing, you know, jewelry, you know, and one particular case, I had a jury tell me they didn't like the other counsel because of the way he was dressed. And he was really, really sharp, very good lawyer, you know, $3,000 suits, $2,000 shoes, $100,000 watch. And to them, they found that they didn't like that. And I'm not saying they made their decision based on that, but that was an observation they made. So there is a real science to this. You know, people like Susan, they're bringing the truth.
That's interesting. So you should shop at, you know, TJ Maxx or Discount, it sounds like. Hey, Susan, so, you know, I want to ask you also about kind of the reaction to one another. Amber Heard's reaction as Johnny Depp is speaking, and then, of course, we're going to, you know, see Amber Heard take the stand and see Johnny Depp's reaction at some point to her. But do you have any guidance on how they should be reacting?
Well, the first thing is they should look engaged. And I think this is my personal experience. I want them to look at the defendant. I want them to look and acknowledge, not just look straight ahead and pretend the other person is not there. Show the other person respect, even if it's a 1 to 2 second glance, just to look over and acknowledge, and then turn your head back the other way. So their facial expressions and how they respond to one another, I think that both of them, if they were to be on their top game, would appear to be a good active listener and show empathy-based listening, which is listening to what they're saying, eyes wide open, and don't look so darn stoic. You know, have some expression in your face. The fact that both of them may go into this moments where there's like no expression is an expression, and it's a detachment. So, and in that way, you don't look humanized. So I think that if the two look at each other just for a brief moment, just showing respect to the other party tells a lot to that jury how he might be towards her outside the jury.
Wow, that is so interesting, and something really subconsciously, I'm sure, impacts people more than they know. Thank you so much, Susan, Constantine, and Jamie White, for your analysis. All right, still with us, jury consultant and human behavior expert Susan Constantine in Orlando, Florida, and also joining the conversation now, criminal defense attorney and host of the True Crime Daily podcast, Josh Ritter in Los Angeles, California. So, Josh, we haven't yet heard from you. Certainly, cross-examination was a lot tougher for Johnny Depp than direct was, but how do you think he did overall?
I think he did well. I think he held up well, especially we're going to talk about cross. I think he held up well on cross. He certainly didn't allow Depp's attorney to catch any kind of rhythm. And in that testimony that we just watched, he also, you know, I think struck some sympathies with the jury. I mean, that was sad to hear. Here, you know, and to one extent, he's got this rock star, Hollywood star lifestyle, and to other extent, it seems very sad, and especially dealing with this opioid crisis, who many of the jurors may know people dealing with that type of addiction. I think he struck a tone that kind of endeared him to some of those jurors.
Yeah, and you know, Susan, you've spoken about how there is kind of a greater empathy in society for those who suffer from addiction, you know, for drug addiction or alcohol addiction. Do you think that Johnny Depp has done an adequate job of kind of humanizing himself to the jury?
Yes, and I think that he's also allowed himself to be authentic about his disease. And he's over and over reiterated about the pain he had as a kid moving forward and how he had to numb his pain. And there's been so many movies out about opioids and what they do. And he spoke about that when he started the drug and that he was concerned about it, right? He didn't want to get bit by the snake. But it was like pain versus reward. So he went in and he did it, and then he got bit by the snake. And he admits that he was bit by the snake, right? And it created this avalanche of things that were happening. And I don't know about your other guests, but you know what moved me, and I keep a very neutral opinion here, but it moved me to feel a lot of empathy and compassion for anybody, not just Johnny Depp, that suffers from any sort of drug and alcohol addiction. This was real, it was raw, and that's the one thing that I think that's really going to connect with this jury.
So Josh, do you think this weakness is actually kind of a win for Johnny Depp?
It is, in a way, and especially when you see the way that Heard's attorney is trying to handle it. You know, they're trying to make it out as though he was just kind of a drunken mess most of his time with her. And I understand kind of strategically where they might be trying to go with that. Is that one, that might lead towards violence, and two, that might affect his ability to properly remember things in the past if he was not entirely sober at most points. But if you're doing it in a way that seems to be attacking somebody who's dealing with a very serious addiction that, like was pointed out, a lot of people are suffering from in this country right now, I think it turned toward disdain toward Depp, which I think is going to be in Depp's favor with the jurors.
Yeah, interesting, and that's actually what I wanted to ask about. Susan, maybe you can share some insight. Do you think that the defense is actually alienating the jury with their line of questioning and maybe kind of, creating some shame around addiction?
That's what's happening. And then I'm also watching Johnny Depp's response. And you notice that his eyes will kind of go up and down and flicker and go back and forth and up and down. And when he's asked a question like about his addiction, and he feels like Johnny Depp feels defensive that he's got to answer the question yes or no. And he's like going back into re-rolling his tape of his life history. And he can't answer it with a yes or no because this back part of his life is why he's where he's at right now. And you see his eyes moving back and forth, up and down. And what's happening is he's pulling up visually experiences. He's recalling all this conversation he's got in his head and what he's heard in his marriage and outside of his marriage. And then you see him looking down and he's pulling up this part where he's actually processing all this emotion and stuff that's happened in his life. That's why you're seeing all these movements in his facial expressions, primarily in his eye movement.
Well, that's very interesting because my next question then would be, how is that playing to the jury? Are they kind of, connecting with that emotion and kind of going with him on that journey back in time to like this childhood trauma and this pain that he says led him to self-medicate?
You're asking me the question?
Yeah, well, yeah, if you don't mind, yes. Susan, it's your area of expertise.
Sure. Right. So I think it will work very well if they have an expert on that explains what drug addiction is and how it happens, how it manifests itself, and then to kind of bring light to it. But also, what's one thing to be concerned about for Johnny Depp is that most people have been taught through TV shows and poor training or reading the internet that people's eyes that shift back and forth they're lying. So they may appear that saying, well, his eyes are moving all over the place, so he's got to be lying. But I'm here to tell you, there's no research that backs that up. Eye movement cues going backwards, forwards, side to side, there is no proof to prove that they're fabricating information. Rather, it's how they're processing information visually, auditorily, or kinesthetically. But the jury doesn't know that. That's the harm in that. So that needs to somehow be explained.
That's very interesting. And speaking of, authenticity, well, Johnny Depp says that Amber Heard has really been embellishing kind of the nature of his drug use, the extent of his drug use. Let's play a clip of that.
The characterization of my substance, quote unquote, substance abuse that's been delivered by Ms. Heard is grossly embellished, and I'm sorry to say, but a lot of it is just plainly false.
Josh, in your opinion, does that testimony really chip away at the defense?
You know, a lot has been made about kind of this slow, deliberate delivery that he has, but he also has a gravitas about him. He's commanding attention in that room. And I was watching that testimony right there. I find him to be believable. I don't know the science behind where he's looking or how he's answering, but my gut reaction is that I find him to be believable. I don't find him to be acting, and I don't find him to be deceptive. Now, there's a little snarkiness that has developed with him and the Heard's attorney in their kind of back and forth. But even then, it's kind of almost endearing and charming, I think, to the jurors. And we can hear laughter inside the courtroom. I don't know if that's only coming from the gallery or if some of that are coming from the jurors. But I think he's done a good job of making himself likable, relatable, and most importantly, believable.
Yeah, and Susan, on this split screen, we're also seeing Amber Heard kind of reacting as he's testifying. There's not a lot of expression, in my opinion, and you're the expert in this area. What do you think? And how do you think it's playing?
Well, you can see her head kind of slightly tilted to the side, but oftentimes what I see that she does is she tips her chin up, her nose goes up. So that is a form of like arrogance, smug. The two words I keep coming into my mind is smugly muggly, and that is what I see a lot. I'm hoping when it comes her time that she changes that trajectory, but overall her emotions are, I'm looking at what is being said and I'm watching her emote, and it's really the lack of emoting that is concerning to me. And when she doesn't agree with something, I would like to see her like maybe smirk, like that's just not true. But yet she just smugly goes over and she starts to write it down. I'm not so sure that that's going to play well for her. Overall, we'll see what happens when she testifies.
And Josh, I know you're a former LA County prosecutor, apart from being a criminal defense attorney. As attorneys, of course, we focus so much on the evidence, the facts themselves, but these kind of intangible elements like body language and emotion and expression, how important is that really for a jury?
I'm so glad you asked that question because it's hugely important. So much. Jurors are people, right? They're watching Johnny Depp and they may hear him say something scandalous or accusatory, and their eyes are going to dart right over towards Amber because they want to see her reaction, like any of us do, like all of us are doing when we watch the testimony on that split screen. And so it's important. And you're right. As a trial attorney, I'm keeping my eyes on the jurors half of the time because I want to see where they're looking and how they're reacting. So I think these kind of non-tangible elements are very important.
Wow, so interesting. Well, Josh Ritter and Susan Constantine, thank you so much for your analysis. Okay, so with us, jury consultant, human behavior expert Susan Constantine in Orlando, Florida, criminal defense attorney, host of the True Crime Daily podcast, Josh Ritter in Los Angeles, California. So Josh, I mean, we're hearing a lot of questions from Ben Rottenborn, the defense attorney here, that seem like they're meant to show what a bad father Johnny Depp was, and really just what a bad person he was. Is that true? First of all, do you agree with me? And is it effective?
No, I agree with you, and I don't think it's really all that effective right here. It's fine if you want to go after a witness and if you really want to dig into them and attack them, but you have to kind of have been given permission by the witness to do that. And what I mean by that is if that witness is arrogant, or that witness is lying and it's obvious, or that witness is lashing back at you, sure, go for it. Go ahead and lay into them and start, pointing out all the horrible things they've done. But Depp hasn't behaved that way. He's been very respectful. He's been very honest, I think. He's been very thoughtful about his answers. And to come at him with this kind of an attack, I don't think is helping as much as they might think it is helping. I don't think it's scoring the points they were hoping it would score. And they might even be creating some sympathy in the minds of the jurors for Johnny Depp.
Yeah, actually, Susan, that's something I wanted to ask you about. Is it creating sympathy for Johnny Depp? Is he looking like a victim, and is Ben Rottenborn looking like a bully?
Well, again, it's going to depend on the profile of that particular juror, and they're all different, and they think differently, and they come with different experiences. So it's hard to say what everybody as a group might think, but maybe once they get into deliberations, they can come more mutually to the same conclusion. But on the other hand, when you're saying what does this kind of play into that the prosecutor's a bully, when looking at Johnny Depp, he answers the questions, he looks at them, and when he feels that the prosecutor is off base and he's trying to accuse him of something that he feels he is not, he wants to clarify. That's where Johnny Depp's strength is. Johnny Depp's strength is you're not going to tell me, and he does it respectfully, a yes or no answer. You're going to hear the truth, and you're going to hear the story behind it. And I think that's going to sit well with a jury.
Yeah, Josh, I wanted to ask, do you think that Johnny Depp standing up for himself is something important for a jury to see? Or does it make them feel, oh, well, maybe he did hit her when she hit him? And, how does that affect the whole case?
I don't think so. I think he's doing this really well. And I'm not sure if that's his kind of natural way of speaking, but he's paying very close attention to the questions. And as Susan pointed out, he's not just answering them in the way that the defense or the Heard's attorney is hoping that he might answer them, but he's going to give the full context. He's not going to let them take cheap points. He's not going to let them get away with yes or no questions when the answer is far from just a simple yes or no. And he's going to give that context and explain himself, and he's advocating for himself. He's doing a very good job, I feel.
Wow. Well, thanks so much for sharing your insight, Josh Ritter and Susan Constantine.